Hey, thanks for joining me to share your experience about COVID-19 while you're still in college. If I could start off by getting your name, what school you go to, and your current grade.
My name is Alexander Dietrich. I go to UND and I'm a senior this year.
So the first question I have for you is, how has it impacted your schooling? And a follow-up question, how has it impacted your schooling performance, such as your GPA?
Really, the only big thing that it's affected my schooling is back in September, right at the very beginning of the year. My flight instructor had to quarantine for just under 2 weeks because he was identified as a close contact, which looking back on it, had I had those 2 weeks, I probably would have been done with the course and not worrying about when am I going to be able to go home for Christmas, if at all. In terms of grades and GPA, it hasn't affected me too much. I know in the spring, prior to everyone kind of getting everything in order, I thought, great, here's how I'm going to get my first F in a course, is just not being able to adapt to everything being all online now. But in terms of grades and GPA, it hasn't affected me too terribly much, maybe a little on the lower end, but nothing noticeable.
Okay. What are your thoughts on how your university has handled this pandemic?
I think UND's handled it as about as well as they could. I like that they were very open and honest with, hey, this is kind of the situation. If we don't do the things we need to do, we're going to have to go to all distance learning again, like we did in the spring. One of the things that I really liked was just they had tons of testing available. It seemed like basically if you needed a test, you could go get one pretty easily, which I've heard from friends who went to schools even smaller than UND, and they were having trouble getting tested because they said there were too many students to test. Um, Overall, I think they did a good job. I mean, obviously, there's some little things that I wish they could have changed with, like the close contact with my instructor. If he tested negative the 2 times he got tested, I wish they would have let him come out of that quarantine a little early, but I understand they need to do what they need to do to keep us open.
Okay, so you've explained a lot about things that the university has done well. What are, is there any more things that you wish the university would have done differently?
Honestly, I can't really think of much that I would have liked them to do differently, just because I have a feeling we saw early on the cases spiked really high, and then they said, we need this to stop. We're really going to push the mask wearing. We're going to push the social distancing. And don't get me wrong, I wear my mask. I understand it's the best thing to do right now, but that doesn't mean I have to like it. I really can't wait for us to stop being able to wear masks and where we can go to the Ralph and watch a hockey game again pretty soon. So I wish this whole thing wouldn't have had to happen, but there's really nothing I could say they could improve upon.
Okay. My next question for you is, how do you feel that the teachers have adapted to the situation?
Oh boy. Some of the teachers I feel have adapted really well. They make things, I don't want to say they've made the courses easier, but they've made them more manageable with the distance setup. They've made it so they can still get the content across effectively. In the aviation department, I really like how they were very flexible with, if you want to come into ground school in person, you can do that. If you want to attend over Zoom, perfectly fine. Um, I've noticed more with the few classes I still have on the east side of campus, so non-aviation courses, they were a little more, I don't want to say disorganized, but they didn't seem to have a game plan ready to go. It seemed like there was a lot of, even this fall, like we've got to keep juggling things, which was to be expected in the spring when this got dropped on us. But I was kind of hoping with the summer to adapt and having a little bit of experience coming out of the spring semester, they'd be a little more organized.
Sure. Um, so my follow-up question for that is, how do you feel you as a student have adapted, and what have you adapted differently?
Um, Well, I think I got lucky in the spring. I was already taking 2 courses online. So I was, for the first half of the semester before COVID became a thing here in the States, I was starting to learn how to deal with online learning with about half my courses. So it was a little bit less severe of a jump for some of my other colleagues in the spring. Um, I think just getting used to having more of a, not deadlines, but I need to get this done now so I can move on to something else, and setting my own deadlines rather than having to see what's basically doing more than what's on the syllabus. I gotta kind of be my own police.
Okay. So two kind of back-to-back questions here for the next two. How has the pandemic impacted your mental health, and how has the pandemic impacted your physical health?
I'll start with the physical health one first. That one, it wasn't too bad for me back in the spring. I was still able to go on runs and do push-ups and sit up, that type of stuff at home. In the summer, it really helped. I work for my hometown's public works department, so I was outside for basically the entire summer, so I wasn't cooped up like a lot of people I know, where I was very fortunate to have a job where I was considered an essential worker. Um, Mental health, it's definitely sucked. I know I haven't had as severe issues as I know unfortunately quite a few people have had, but two of the big things that really impacted me were, my mom is an emergency room nurse and she had COVID herself. Thankfully, it was very mild symptoms, nothing too severe, but she is very involved with the union and hearing the constant, they're going to furlough all these staff members, they're reusing N95 masks, which even myself as a construction worker, I don't reuse N95s, and here they are having to face a pandemic with subpar PPE. So that really affected me, just the stress of wondering if my mom's going to be okay. And then in the aftermath of George Floyd being killed in Minneapolis, I live only a half an hour or so from downtown Minneapolis, so it wasn't fun seeing my hometown on international news on fire and seeing the National Guard with live rounds in their weapons downtown. And one of the things that probably was one of the darkest days, at least in my lifetime in the Twin Cities, was I got up to go to work, and as I was driving to work, I looked to the south and I just saw a big black plume of smoke rising. And that was the night after the 3rd Precinct and many other buildings were burned down. So it definitely has had an impact, but it certainly hasn't been a severe impact on my mental health.
Okay. Which one of those two do you feel has impacted you more? And it sounds like mentally might be the answer to that one.
Definitely the mental aspect. I mean, really it didn't get too real for me until I found out my mom had to deal with, I think at the start of the pandemic, they were only given one N95 per staff member. And then these N95s are going to be sanitized and reused. And that was like, great. Well, my mom's basically going to get COVID now. And she did. And thankfully it was very mild, but just having the stress of, is my mom going to get sick and potentially die from this, was something I did not like having to deal with.
Yeah, for sure. So I only have 3 more questions here for you. What are some trends that you've observed in your peers since this has started, or common trends I should add to that?
I guess I've definitely noticed a lot of people are really taking advantage of the attending class via Zoom rather than going in person. I don't know how well that is affecting their grades, if I'm going to be honest. I'd be very curious to see what the average GPA last fall compared to this fall will look like. I know at work it was very interesting this past summer. We like to talk with people in the community because we live in Champlin too, so we all know a lot of the residents in town. But this year it was a lot of, we're trying to keep the Public Works and Utilities Department from having a COVID spike. So it's like, we want to chat, but kind of socially distanced. So it seems almost like people are going to be not divided in a negative sense, but people are going to just be kind of wary of one another once this all ends, be it good or bad. But it definitely seems like people are wanting their space more than ever before.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. My next question for you is, has it impacted your any expected finish date or your graduation date at all?
COVID itself really hasn't. At least it shouldn't right now. I'm still on track to finish my flying for this semester before the start of next, so that shouldn't be too much of an issue. If anything, the last spring and this fall, I took quite a few classes to keep myself busy, and I'm running out of classes, so I'm potentially having to add on either a minor or some sort of a specialization to keep myself at least full-time status as a student.
And my very last question for you is, will you be having a plan to return to college this following spring semester? And it sounds like that answer is yes.
Yep, I'll be returning. Not once through this whole pandemic have I thought I'm going to drop out of college. There was a point where I considered potentially looking at taking a gap year and taking on a full-time position at the city just to work and hopefully ride out the worst of COVID. But now that there's a vaccine coming, fingers crossed, no hiccups with that, and we can hopefully get this thing under control. And who knows, like I said earlier, maybe by this time next year, we'll all be back at the Ralph watching a hockey game.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much. That's all the questions I have for you. And thanks for sharing your experience.
Yep, no problem.